Hello and welcome to lesson 20. In the previous lesson you learned how a computer that runs Red Hat Enterprise Linux should normally start. In this lesson you'll learn what you can do if it doesn't. The focus of this lesson is on some essential troubleshooting skills. Nothing really advanced, but we want you to be capable of fixing at least some issues that you may run into while booting. Mainly two topics are covered in this lesson. The first topic teaches how to use grub to boot your system in a non-default state. You will not only learn how to act if your server doesn't start up normally, you'll also learn how to make changes in grub persistent. Next you will learn how to troubleshoot a lost password for the user root. The exercise at the end of this lesson will help you apply the most important skills that you have learned.
When your server boots, you have a few seconds to get into the grub menu. If you don't do anything, it will continue automatically within a matter of seconds. If your server doesn't boot well, it makes sense to enter one of the troubleshooting modes. That can be the systemd rescue target, or it can be the emergency target. So how do we get in there? Well, you need to do E to show the grub boot options. The first part of the boot options is not very important. It is mainly the Linux line that counts. And on the Linux line the kernel is started with all the arguments that are needed to start the kernel. To start with, you probably don't like the RH, GB and quiet. By taking them out you can see what's happening while you're booting your system. And next you can specify some of the options to start something else. And the something else means anything but the default system state. So that would typically be a systemd unit that you're starting. This can be compared to the old way of entering run levels. A run level was a minimal state in previous versions of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but we don't have run levels anymore. Instead we have systemd targets. So the systemd target I want to be starting is the rescue target. So I just type rescue.target and that will do it. From there I can do a Ctrl X to start, and this boots the system. As you can see, in the rescue target you still have to enter the root password for maintenance. In previous versions of Red Hat it was easy to get in the system without knowing the root password. In Red Hat 7 that has become real hard. So once I've typed the root password I can start my maintenance. So once I'm done doing whatever I wanted to do, the best way to go on is by typing systemctl reboot. This will bring you back into a normal operational state. So to write changes that you have applied when booting the system, you need grub to mkconfig -o followed by the name of the master grub configuration file, which is grub.cfg. It is very important to realize that the grub.cfg file is a file that you will never ever touch manually. There are always front-end commands that you will use if you need to do anything with the file. So this was the easy solution. Apply the fixes you need while booting, and once you have booted successfully, write them to the grub configuration file. There's another way also, and that is by using the etc default directory. In there you can find a file with the name grub that contains some of the parameters. And these parameters can be modified. For example, to change command line options that you want to be used while booting your system. Now these parameters relate to the configuration files in the etc grub.d directory. This is where it's becoming a little bit more complicated, because these are different files that tell your system how it should boot. I just want to give you an impression, but before doing that I want to summarize the most important thing: don't touch these files. because they are complicated script files, and really they aren't made to be modified by an administrator. So don't touch them. If ever you think you need to do something complicated with grub, there's a whole lot of grub2 commands. So these commands allow you to install grub, to make a new image, to set a grub boot password, to probe operating system configuration, to reboot a specific image, and so on. But really you shouldn't be required to touch any of the grub configuration files manually, especially not in RHCSA. On previous versions of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, resetting a root password or logging into a system where you didn't know the root password was relatively easy. On Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, because of the change to systemd, it has become much harder. Just starting an emergency target or a rescue target isn't enough. You really need to break into the system, and I will show you how to do that. So first we need to enter the grub boot menu and look for the kernel line, where at the end of the line you need to pass the parameter rd.break. rd.break is telling the next part of the boot procedure, which is initrd, to stop at a specific location at the end of the initramfs. So basically this will bring you into a system where all the supporting modules are available, but no file systems have been mounted yet. So it allows you to get in even before the point where you get in if you're entering an emergency target level. So once you have entered this, you can do Ctrl X to boot your system. As you can see, the rd.break brings you into a root shell without asking for any password. But you are not quite done yet. There's a couple of more things you need to do before you can reset the root password. First, you need to remount the system root in a read-write mode. So because we are so early in the boot procedure, the root file system is mounted on a mount point with the name sysroot. And it's a read-only mount, and this command is making it read-write. Next we need to make the contents of sysroot the current root directory. And you do that by using chroot. And at this point you can set the new password, not just by doing anything, but by echoing the new password to pass wd --std in, followed by the name of the user root. Now we are almost there, but we also need to tell SE Linux that it needs to do an automatic relabeling. Because we are so early in the boot procedure, SE Linux isn't completely functional, and if you don't do the touch of the .auto relabel file, your changes will get lost. At this point you can do Ctrl D to exit the chroot shell and another Ctrl D, which will restart your system. This will take a while, like 2 minutes or so is normal. And once you're back, you can log in with the password that you've just set.
So let's resume what you need to do to reset a forgotten root password. And please do remind that this is an extremely important procedure and you should know how to do it. So first you need to enter the grub menu while booting. Find the line in the grub menu that starts with 16/VM Linus-3.10 and add rd.break to the end of the line. You should notice that the version number in the VM Linus file might be different. It depends on the current version of the kernel that you're using. So once you have booted with the rd.break option, you drop in a root shell that is on the initramfs. And because the initramfs doesn't have access to your hard drive already, you need to type a couple of commands. First of them is mount-o remount, rw/sysroot. That makes the /sysroot directory writable. Next you need to do chroot/sysroot to make it your root directory. And then you can reset the password for user root, like by doing echo secret pipe passwd --std in root. And that will set the password for user root to secret. Don't forget to create the file /.autorelabel. And then you can do Ctrl-D and Ctrl-D again to reboot your computer. And once it comes up again, the user root will have the password reset. Now let's do the exercise. The exercise is pretty simple. I want you to reboot your server in troubleshooting mode, where you can reset the root password and change the root password to password.
In the exercise, you were asked to reset the root password. To do that, you start from grub and you enter the editor mode by pressing E. You go to the end of the kernel line, and at the end of the kernel line, take away RHDB and quiet, because it will allow you to see what is happening, and add rd break. rd.break will bring you in a very early stage in the init ramfs, which allows you to get into the system without entering a password. As you can see, it drops a root shell, but it's a root shell in the init ramfs environment. So we need to do a couple of things before we can actually change the password. First, that is to remount in read-write mode the sysroot directory, where the root file system on disk has been temporarily mounted. Next we need a chroot on sysroot, which makes the contents of this directory the root environment, and then we can just type passwd to change the password. It does complain that it's too short, but since you are root, you can do it anyway. Now there is something that you do need to know, and that is that at this moment the SE Linux system hasn't been activated yet. And the passwd utility moves a new file over the etc shadow file, which makes that SE Linux context hasn't been set correctly. So that would mean that the login procedure after a reboot wouldn't allow you to access the file containing all the passwords, which brings you into big trouble. And therefore there is this very essential step that you need to force an SE Linux auto relabel. What is this going to do? Well, in SE Linux there's a policy, and the policy sets the right context on all files on your system. I know at this point, without having talked about SE Linux yet, it's a little bit hard to understand, but I hope it makes sense once you have done the SE Linux lesson. At this point anyway, you don't really need to understand, you just need to know that you have to do this touch /.autorelabel. Next, do a Ctrl-D and another Ctrl-D, which will reboot your system and allow you to log in as root with the new password that you've just set.
And this brings us to the end of lesson 20. In this lesson you have learned about a couple of basic troubleshooting skills. You now know how to enter the different troubleshooting modes from the grub boot menu, and we have looked at an important issue, which is resetting a lost password for the user root. So if your server gets in trouble, you should be able to rescue it.